Hi, I'm Letitia Capra, and I'm going to talk about Alberto Giacometti's the sculpture The Three Men Walking 2, 1949. In the post-World War II era, Giacometti was preoccupied with the themes of how we relate and interact through space and distance, specifically through the images of the standing and walking man, the bust, and the nude woman, as his vision of reality. He's probably most well known for creating this human figure as a symbol of suffering in a post-World War era. And so certainly this and others of his sculptures suggest a particular broad spectrum of interpretation and association for the viewer. But it's undeniable that his vision through these constructed moments contemplate the fragility of human experience and human existence. So, for example, the alienation of modernism through the space between each figure exists as a barrier to overcome, and how those experiences shape and mold us. So, on the outset, he began with a relatable and recognizable image simply by using the human form, and as opposed to using some kind of abstract form, we can immediately recognize this as a human form. By avoiding a completely realistic rendering of these figures, he forces the viewer to look beyond what is immediately recognizable. So the viewer has to examine that texture, the shape, the material, color, position, and the space that is created between each object. So also the size, which was about 30 inches in height of the object, begs the viewer to get closer in order to examine those formal qualities. The figures are lengthy and extremely thin and reduced in mass and volume. And at first, they are kind of reminiscent of stick figures or archaic cave paintings. However, the texture communicates something more. The stripping and tearing away of the muscles gives the skin an appearance of having been beaten and bruised. And this presence of rough or heavily worked texture assumes a kind of violent removal and also a wariness of the figures. The lack of the volume also expresses a weightlessness for the figures, and as if they're insignificant and could blow away at any moment. And there's a little bit of playfulness within that, but the bronze material and the firmly planted enlarged feet contrast with that weightlessness, that fragility, by not only keeping the figures anchored mid-stride, but they give them a density that insists that there's something important going on, something profound in this space. So the balance between the positioning of the figures caught mid-stride, acting as a group yet isolated because of the lack of physical contact, and that weightlessness expresses a theme of loneliness and despair. The dark color and the texture, the violent texture, also further exaggerate that sense of melancholy. The elongated thinness of the sculptures, of the figures as well, the positioning creates a particularly disturbed or distressed sorrow of that isolation, or even allude to the experience of modernism eating away at culture and individual identity. So especially since the faces are blank and are heavily worked as much as the bodies, there seems to be no individuality within the figures, as if they're made from the same mold. So there's nothing different really about them in that sense of having any kind of separating mark. So immediately we relate to this object through our own experiences of what it means to exist and interact with each other, coming into contact with each other, and how that relates to the changing world around us. And there's an immediate drawing into the object rather than standing back and contemplating or admiring a particular figure or a character that the artist leads us to believe about it. Instead, he created a kind of a blank slate. So the viewer must go in and and have a deeper interaction with the object and the space between the figures, and also the object and the viewer. So what I find interesting at this first glance of this object is I am immediately confronted with the kinetic energy of the movement of the figures caught in this moment. So we've caught them in the process of possibly losing that energy, as though life's horrors have stripped them bare, and creating this annihilation, or this wasting away, which is probably why he was so famous for creating this image of the human suffering, the suffering humanity after such a horrible events of World War II. So that's all I got, and thank you for listening. Bye.